This summer, an old family friend, Carol Nara, sent my brothers and me a recording of my mom wishing Carol's parents, Barb and Joe, a happy 25th wedding anniversary, with fond remembrances and reflections, videoed, remember video? In 1986 in our backyard in Cleveland Heights. And it's been almost 30 years since I've heard my mom's voice, probably listening to her answering machine cassette for the last time as we packed up her place following her death in 1995 at the age of 58. I shared this video with Marjorie and the kids who never knew my mom, had never heard her voice, had never seen her movements, and I suggested that her deep and rich tone that came across in the video is one of her gifts to Edmund. Hers was a warm voice and also commanding, and could proclaim in a way that everyone present would attend to whatever she was saying. So maybe Edmund will use her gifts someday wisely. Maybe he'll become a lector at St. Michael's. Our collect this morning prays three things: that God will graft in our hearts the love of God's name, increase in us true religion, nourish us with all goodness, and bring forth in us the fruit of good works. This is a beautiful prayer that asks for our transformation. Lord, graft your way onto our very being with a ligature. The word religion may be derived from the word ligature. Bind us to your truth, so that your goodness, Lord, becomes the food that brings forth our own good works. From grafting, binding, taking in, and then sharing comes the life we can live with God's grace. Taking in the good and the bad, I suppose, is part and parcel of this. It's out there, it's abundant. Our Hebrew scriptures this morning circle around a bunch of obedient folks who declare, or at least hint, that suffering will come along even in their obedience to God, and they face all of this without turning away or hanging back. Jeremiah works hard to be God's mouthpiece, and he suffers continual insult on God's account as a result, and he keeps at it. Our psalmist has been steadfast in obedience and invites God's test and trial in the face of his purposefulness. I say his, who knows? It seems there is a lesson hinted at, that in loving God and serving God, one must turn one's face into the winds of whatever befalls, and God will not abandon them. Another softer way of saying this is not that one must, but that one can. In loving and serving God, we can face the winds that befall us. Now, suffering is, in a wearisome turn of phrase, part of our life. Therapy may try to help us manage it. Meditation to help us release it. Religion to help explain it. Art in literature and film to capture it. Suffering's there. Preaching about suffering comes off as arrogant at best, harmful and tone-deaf at worst. And we humans anyway have a tendency to make everything a competitive sport. Suffering is not a competition. We all experience it, and we each have developed ways more or less helpful to deal with it. Directives from someone else are never helpful. Usually the best we can offer one another is observation from our own experiences, or simply to be compassionately present. Viktor Frankl endured imprisonment at several Nazi prison camps during World War II, surviving not through savagery, but through a slow and intentional search for some kind of meaning. His premise, as a psychologist, was that human beings are generally driven to find meaning and purpose in life as basic motivations. And his work in this regard was to distill from his life things that gave it meaning, be they experiences and relationships with people, or acts of creativity and talent, or in the attitudes he was able to adopt towards his suffering. That meaning will be distinct to each of us, each person's journey. But our search for meaning, to Viktor Frankl, is what carries us along. And in a prison camp, Frankl was stripped of everything except the suffering that he and his comrades endured. Yet meaning emerged for him even then. And if suffering is an ineradicable part of life, and if life has meaning, then suffering too must have meaning. Suffering can give us something if we can face it, move into it, and through it. We won't emerge unscathed on the other side, of course, but we will have the chance to work with what has happened or with what is still happening. And we can choose whether or not to take that chance. Importantly, we don't need to do this alone. Frankl dots his book with characters that he met, befriended, or simply managed. And in our gospel this morning, Jesus, who was facing his death in Jerusalem, is surrounded by his disciples. They're all there. And he wasn't looking forward to this event, of course, but he had no choice, really, if his message was to have the strength it needed in order to last. And last it has. Here we are in church today, 2,000 years later, trying to practice what he taught us. His suffering is a measure of the urgency of his message. And then in exclaiming, "This must never happen, Lord," Peter was either contemplating a failed Messiah or contemplating losing a beloved friend. And either of these were events he wanted to avoid. But Jesus needed Peter and all of his disciples and all of us to walk into and through it with him, if for no other reason than they will help him to endure the trials ahead, and we will help his message to continue into God's unfolding dream. There is a meaning in this journey for our very survival in the world today. The ligature that Jesus asks, the true religion, as it were, is for his followers to manage their world-governed ego away from the center, which is to deny themselves, to enter into the abundant life that will include both joy and suffering, to take up their cross, and allow themselves to be led without fear, to be led by Jesus. Follow me, he says. To have Peter deny or demur on this was the thing Jesus needed least at this moment. A teammate who, for his own ego and expectations, was unwilling and therefore unreliable to stand in solidarity and accountability with the final message that Jesus left us, which is that love liberates the weak and fiercely defends the oppressed and repairs division when it is bound authentically in our actions, And this love is worth dying for, says Jesus, does Jesus, shows Jesus. It's worth dying for. It's that important. Jesus' message of love runs deep. It's the only thing that matters, really. And Paul picks up on it when he lets us know that if we stage our lives with love and live towards love, good is going to follow. If we bind ourselves authentically, our love will be genuine. It is nourishment that will bring goodness from us. We will find ourselves overcoming the worst if we are able to love. It will take, as Jesus reminds Peter, a willingness to face the sufferings that lie before us. But we can do this with God. And if we have the team in place that we need, our loved ones, our family and our friends, our church community, coming together when we reach out to them. Jesus doesn't say we have to do this alone. At 58 years old, my mom suffered from chronic obstructive pulmonary disease after decades of smoking and reached a point in the summer of 1995 where she had to enter hospital to undergo arduous treatments to clear her lungs, which might help her to start breathing again on her own, which would give her strength then that she would need to undergo treatments for her breast cancer, which had metastasized on her spine after 10 years remission. My brothers and I watched a loved one, only steps away from her end, working hard not to slip off a trail that was crumbling beneath her feet and before our eyes. My mom's deep and rich Edmund-like voice came to us through her oxygen mask as she sat at the hospital on her bed, tiny and mighty, surrounded by her 3 sons and her doctors. "Gentlemen," she said, she liked using that word, "Gentlemen, I need a team today, with everyone doing their part to get through this." There was no room. She could abide no temptation to lie back or turn away. It would indeed have been satanic, I guess, for any of us to declare at that moment, "This can't be happening," and to collapse in a sort of muddle. Jesus needed Peter, and John and my mom needed us. She didn't make it, and her life on earth ended a few days later. And yet, she got the meaning of this event through, in the sense that my brothers and I witnessed something then that we can now lean on today. We all will face events that will present us with sufferings we must engage. May we endure with an open spirit. May we offer still our alleluias and our thanks be to God. And then may we remain curious and interested as we step forward from there. Amen.